We're so sad. We thought we... Oh, Virginia, thank you so much. Well, I'm Mitch.
Inside already?
Yes.
Oh,
Okay,
well,
sorry.
thank you for coming back out. We appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll make
All
it
right.
worth it.
Well, we have part of our audience is live right now watching a lot of young science enthusiasts. If
Good.
you don't mind telling them who you are and what you are being awarded for tonight.
Okay, and my name is Virginia Lee, and I am being recognized for the work that I have done and in identifying the different misfolded neurodegenerative disease proteins in patients with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, frontotemporal degeneration, and amyotrophic lateral sclerosis.
Wow, okay. Can you speak to what led you to this research in the first place?
I was doing, and I'm a brain scientist, so I study the brain. And so I was studying some structural proteins in the brain. And at that time, people thought that these structural proteins are the backbone of the pathology called neurofibrillary tangles in Alzheimer's disease brain. So we thought, okay, we need to confirm whether that's true or not. As it turned out that it isn't. So then we was on a quest to identify what it is.
So when we look at the different diseases that you described and we look at the different proteins that affect the diseases, you see that there is a comparison in the way that the diseases happen, but the proteins are different, right?
Well, the proteins are different, but there's actually, initially, there's, different disease proteins started to appear, but then at late stage of the disease, they actually kind of overlap in the sense that Alzheimer patients and at late stage of the disease could develop movement disorder like Parkinson's disease, and they actually accumulate Lewy bodies. And whereas patients with Parkinson's disease, and many of them at late stage disease develop Alzheimer's disease, and they have Alzheimer pathology.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And you think the connection is through the proteins?
I would say that it's sort of like a bad neighborhood. So if your brain started to degenerate, so bad things started to happen, and
It just sort of escalates.
yes, escalates exactly. Yeah.
So the hope is that this research, right, will lead towards some sort of breakthrough or treatment.
Right. So in addition to identifying these proteins, we also actually develop animal models
Okay.
and of these diseases. And so we develop animal models by injecting a little bit of the pathological neurofibrillary tangle from Alzheimer's brain, for example, into mice. And then the mice would then develop pathology much like
Similar.
those, yes, in Alzheimer's.
And then so that's currently what you're doing then to study what to do to maybe help with the mice and therefore human?
Right. So basically, obviously, this is the beauty of academic research. So I do the science, I publish the papers, and people read it, particularly pharmaceutical companies. They said, okay, can we repeat what they have done? And they can. And so now they're actually using the model to identify therapies.
Okay, that's amazing.
I want to ask something about, we have like a very young audience, as I said, and I think I had read that you are very interested in music, and that was potentially another career at some point for you?
Yeah, so I actually grew up in a very traditional Chinese family.
Okay.
So my mother never wanted me to have a career, a professional.
Okay, but
let alone a scientist. So so my mother said, okay, you play the piano, and then you can go to England maybe to study a little piano, and then later on you come back, you teach, and then you get married and have children. And so, but I have other plans. So.
But how do you?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank goodness. I'm curious. Do you think that experience to other parts of the world? Like a lot of people think that scientists only like one thing and are only interested in one thing, but you find out there's such a diverse array of interests among people.
Right.
Do you have any advice for young people when they're exploring this world with relation to you having many different interests like that?
So I belong to the group of individuals that really are not differentiated. There's not one particular thing that I like. And so, but at some point, you just have to make the decision. You just go with your gut and say, okay, what can I do that will have the potential to last for my entire career? And there are not that many things that will sustain you for 30, 40 years. And so that's why I decided to do this, to go into research. Yeah.
So there's two questions that unanimously our audience wanted us to ask a group of very intelligent scientists. And the first one is about your perspective on the world. You study the brain and how it sometimes can dysfunction. What does your research And what does it teach you about the meaning of life?
This is a very philosophical question, and the meaning of life is a bit too profound for us to discuss in this short period of time.
Yeah.
But I think that we need to treat life very seriously, and it's a responsibility that we have for the planet Earth, and we need to be sure that we take care of where we live, and then so that we have an environment so that we can be happy living in it for generations to come. And so we need to do that. Everybody has to do their part and to take care of planet Earth.
So that leads to our last question, which a lot of these young people are asking. It's what we think about all the time, and as science communicators, what we're trying to figure out, which is the climate crisis. And we are currently going through, in our opinion, probably the biggest issue of our lifetime, and they wanted us to ask scientists just what their opinions are. I mean, you sort of spoke to it then, but what do you think about the climate crisis?
I think that we all need to do our part, as I mentioned earlier, and so that to slow down this climate change. And I think that it may not be completely, it may not be, it may be inevitable, but as long as we can reduce the rate of this climate change, and that's what we are working towards, that's the least we need to do, is to slow that process.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank
you so much for coming out of the event
we
to come talk to
appreciate
us.
Enjoy your
appreciate
evening.
it.
Thank
Have a
you
great
so
evening.
much.
And you look amazing. I love that dress.